Hello everyone and welcome back to the second part of the Deserts of Kharak lore series. Today we reach part 4, the Kiithid. We start off with the Szechit and we know some of them from the campaign, like Rachel or her brother, or many other people that were involved with the Kapisi. As a Kiith, the Szechit are most likely an oddity in the power structures of Kharak. They are ancient and respected Kiith whose expertise has been courted by many Kiithzar across Kharak in any place and time. That what makes them so special though is that they never parlayed their powers into influence or political gain. Their strength and interest lies not in the political power those others may seek, instead it lies behind understanding, in questioning, observing, predicting and recording. Over the centuries it was the Szechit who made many important discoveries. They were the first to plot the path of the planets and derive a calendar from it, which is nowadays used as the KDS dating system. They also discovered the 13-year progressive cycle of sandstorms and thus enable prediction of where the rain that follows the sandstorm cycle would land. Most impartial histories of the heresy wars and the resulting reformation were penned by Szechit scribes who also recorded the encroaching desert at the time. During times of upheaval, the Szechit have always been much too valuable as allies and advisors to be made into proper vassals. Any who killed or attempted to interrogate a Szechit were shunned by the philosophers and scientists of the age for 100 years. In order to preserve the knowledge, any Kiithid willing to become Szechit swore an oath directly to the Szechit Tsar and had to serve faithfully for 2 whole generations before being instructed in sacred wisdoms. The closest the Szechit ever came to a scandal was during the Time of Reason, when it became known that some Szechit had secretly lived under a secondary oath to Kiith Naabal. The Naabal used their position of Szechit immunity to move through various warring factions and carry out missions of retrieval and intelligence gathering. On discovery, the sense of outrage was strong, but Fleer Szechit Tsar, the leader of the time, argued that the extremity of the situation had warranted the actions. She brought enough of her own people to see things her way to avoid sanctioning the families involved, though there is still some sense of mistrust between Szechit and Naabal to this day. As the Time of Reason progressed, Szechit expanded studies to celestial mechanics and mathematics. Some families began delving into the nature and origin of life on Kharak. Within a century, Krill Szechit presented a paper to the Diamite in Tyr, presenting evidence that Kiithid bore little resemblance to other biological life on the planet. This scientific proof of the religious tenet of exile shook Kharakid society, but once and for all established Kiith Szechit as those that serve the truth above all, however disturbing it might be. Now we come to Kiith Gaalsien. They are one of the oldest Kiithid, dating back to the time before history was even recorded. They have always been a spiritual and political force. They are one of the major 3 religious Kiithid on Kharak. The Gaalsien preached an especially strong message of punishment. Righteous suffering and humility were the price the people had to pay because of arrogance that led to expulsion from a celestial paradise. Their strong dogma allowed them to survive better in the early days, when various ecological disasters made life difficult between 75 KDS and 250 KDS. Once the turbulent times were over and the Kiithid came closer to the temperate polar regions, more innovative Kiithid regained power and the Gaalsien power began to fade somewhat. Nowadays, most archaeologists believe that the Gaalsien intentionally started the heresy wars to bring all lesser Kiithid under its power again. When Kiith Naabal emerged from Tyr, their new technology aided in the lessening of the dogma of penance and repression, finally shattering the last hold the Gaalsien, whom had already suffered from 300 years of war, had over the population. As a result, the Gaalsien became even more extreme in their religious fervor to make up for the rest of the sinful planet, according to their own words. By 710 KDS in the Time of Reason, the Gaalsien were down to less than 30 vassal families, and only the great desert temple city of Sachukar remained under its power. In 717 KDS, the Kiithzar of the Gaalsien performed an act of infamy that lives on to this day. At the time, Sachukar was the artistic gem of Kharak, built in the name of the god Sachuk, with libraries collecting the works of all the people of Kharak and temples adorning the streets to show Seljuk what the people had done so he could judge them in their deeds. When the city had been built, it had been a hospitable valley in the north, but over the years the desert claimed the valley. Only due to a series of complex defenses could the city stand, as designed by the great engineer Naabal. During the height of the spring winds, Seljuk was lost. In an act of divine madness, Mirpat Gaalsien Sar ordered his people to blow up the defenses against the sands, and following the light of hundreds of explosions, the sand came to Seljuk. Within less than 2 days, the city was buried and lost, with several thousand people dead in the mass evacuation. Following this unimaginable deed, Kiith Gaalsien were convicted in absentia by the Diamid in Tyr and deemed outlaw Kiith. They had little effect on the Gaalsien though, as they had slipped away into the wastes during a night of terror. Since then, Gaalsien have wandered the desert, surviving by skill and ritual. Sometimes they raid scientific communities or stations and leave massive theological documents proclaiming how close the Kharaki as a whole are to the end. All military expeditions to track the Gaalsien down for good have failed, which helped build them a slightly mythical reputation, with some people thinking that they could by now only have survived by the grace of Seljuk. What follows now comes from a secret briefing in 1110 to the Diamid. Despite all the odds, the Gaalsien kept getting stronger after fleeing to the deserts. According to intelligence reports, their production facilities should have been fallen into disrepair and lost long ago. Instead, their technology ever increases, outclassing even the Northern Coalition. Not only did the Gaalsien find new technology, they also seem to have found a massive new source of resources, which allows them not only to keep their population alive, but also keep up building military forces and assailing the Northern Coalition. It was this briefing, and the danger it clearly outlined, that brought the Diamid to suggest a push forward to the Operation Kadim. Now we come to Kiith Naabal. Not much was known about them prior to the emergence at the end of the Heresy Wars. The little that was known mentioned them as tradesmen and heretics. Various recordings speak of Kiith Gaalsien being especially vehement in their persecution of families under the Naabal banner. There is some evidence that it was this that drove the Naabal to the hidden valley refuge, which would later become Tyr. During the Heresy Wars, Kiith Naabal isolated themselves completely from the outside. Small parties with direct fealty sworn to the Kiith Sar of the Naabal were sent out sometimes to retrieve important information or texts that were in danger of being disappeared in the fires of war. Sometimes these parties would even spirit away scholars imprisoned for heresy. Only when Ifrit Naabal Sar came to power did the isolation policy start to crumble. He realized that the wars were coming dangerously close to destroying the last infrastructure that kept the bulk of Kharakid people alive, that fields were burned, dams destroyed, and sand traps torn down simply to deprive the enemy of their valuable resources. The days of civilization, as he saw it, were numbered. Though pacifist, Ifrit Naabal Sar proposed an intervention. A few years passed while they assembled the military forces they required. When they rose, they swept from the hidden city of Tyr like a desert storm. Steam-powered vehicles towed cannons to bring down walls of despotic Kiithid, while soldiers using repeater rifles and wearing hardened armor moved to rout enemy armies 20 times their size. At every holding, village and city liberated, Ifrit Naabal spoke and offered the people the fruits of Naabal's science and technology if they but lay down their arms and end the pointless destruction. Unlike others, Naabal Sar did not demand reunification of former Kiith ties. After 300 years of brutal war, most smaller Kiithid were more than willing to accept, and their numbers soon swelled the Naabal ranks to immense size, growing to 50 times the starting forces, whose only desire was to put an end to the Heresy Wars. 3 years was all it took. Then peace once again reigned on Kharak. As his last act before stepping down as Naabal Sar, Ifrit Naabal established the Diamid in Tyr as a place where all Kiithid, powerful and weak, could gather to resolve disputes and set policy for all of Kharak. In the years that followed, the Naabal rebuilt the damaged infrastructure of Kharak and improved upon it with their no longer secret methods and sciences. Many of the modern industrial Kiithid began under tutelage of the Naabal, for they accepted all that wanted to learn new crafts and trades, and then let them go their own way after teaching them. 200 years after the end of the Heresy Wars, the perilous sand sailor roads to the south had been replaced with rail-mounted steam cars, and Kiithpaktu had been given a permanent presence in the Dayamid, even though they were settled in the distant south. Content to fade away into history, the Naabal were called back into action with the emergent stresses on Kharakid society due to the encroaching desert and the attacks and hostility from Gaalsien. The Naabal have formed a permanent alliance with the Sechet and Soban and had taken the lead in the expeditions to the Jaraci anomaly. The Naabal have always had an eye to the future of the people and have been willing to sacrifice much to keep the Kharakid alive.